walk around here and step in here and see if we know anybody. I know we know a few of them. Probably been 7, 8 years since I've been down in here, at least. He's on over here, and we'll just start at the front. It's like a piece of old iron fence system right there. Indian Springs Cemetery. Yeah, you can tell at one time that was some kind of wrought iron fence. There's another piece of it. Still got a base plate. Look at the decoration in that. Makes you wonder what the whole fence would have looked like. Founded in 1818, it says. These is all Sadlers. And as we walk, you can see here your older headstones. And if you look behind them on the highest point, you can see where those older headstones are. That's usually in most of these cemeteries, if there's a high point, that's where you're gonna find your older cemeteries, which is gonna connect you to the earliest history of an area. Mr. Neely Sadler. Mr. Neely was 85 when he died. Mr. Ed Neely, he was a cattleman. That's what I remember him for. He also at one time had some land leases around where I grew up and had cattle all over the place. I knew Mr. Neely, knew his son Ed. Mr. Neely used to come around the neighborhood all the time. A couple of his sons that worked around him messing with the cows here and there. I remember an old flatbed truck. One of his relatives, Mr. Ed Sadler, which I believe was his son, was also a county commissioner. I knew Mr. Ed also. And here's Mr. Ed, here on the bottom of his headstone. You see the roll of hay there, cattle and a man tending to him. He was also, Mr. Ed was also a member of the U.S. Navy. Another note as well, he was also heavily involved in not just the research, but the restoration and push for this cemetery that we're standing in today, Indian Springs Cemetery. He was actually distantly kin on my Cleveland Sadler step-grandfather's side. He was one of the county commissioners that could get things done. This is another one of Paul Miller. We had looked at Mr. Paul's grave over at the San Pedro Cemetery, and also his son Tommy. This is Joel. This is another son of Mr. Paul's. This one has always stuck out in me. I remember reading on the bottom of it, "Remember me as you walk by. As you are now, so once was I. As I am, now soon you shall be. Prepare for heaven and follow me." I remember the first time I seen that on his headstone. Mr. Joel was a cabinet maker. Mr. Joel, I want to say his mama lived behind the feed store for years. And then after she passed off, a sister. I might have that mixed up, but the 20 years I worked at the feed store, I seen his family behind the store quite regular, out and about in the yard. Always enjoyed working in the yard. Mr. Joe, he's well known for his cabinet work and carving. Old boy named Timmy Spanky that worked for me one time described it was a bench, he said, that they used at a church. I want to say is what he told me, for the kids to get up to the fountain. He described the claws and the feet in it that this man had carved in it. I did know Mr. Joe. Mr. Joe was a pretty good fella. I've walked down to the other end from where we're parked. I never noticed these here before. I don't remember this place being fenced. These are fenced separately, so we're not gonna walk over there. Larry Pearson. I remember Mr. Larry. I'm pretty sure that's the same Larry Pearson and his wife I remember. Used to come into the feed store. Seemed like he had a horse. And he had an old trailer that was actually made for hauling a motorcycle that he used to get his rolled hay on, and he'd buy some sweet feed from me. I'm pretty sure that's the same Mr. Pearson. We're not gonna walk over in there. They went through a lot of trouble to fence that separately, so we're gonna respect that. All down this side are individually fenced and separated graves. I'm not sure why they're outside of the rest of them. That seems kind of strange. There's another one that's separated and fenced on its own. There's some that's just kind of out there, but they're outside the fence. I don't know, that seems odd why they'd have a fence and have them fenced separately. This is John J. Stevens, born in 1841, died in 1908. At the age of 67 years old. Mr. Stevens was a Confederate soldier. This picture I found on findthegrave.com. You can see here he got his rebel flag. He was a private in Company E, 6th Florida Infantry. Confederate States Army.
How do they draw one?
So you could take that information off that Confederate soldier's grave and possibly pull up some information on him, be able to see some records on him. Not all, but some you can. Old Herschel. I knew old Herschel. Herschel was actually my Aunt Beatty's brother. Now I remember Herschel from way back. Herschel not only worked in the logging industry, Herschel was a mechanic. About anything needed done, Herschel could take care of it. But I remember Herschel in the day before the hunting clubs and the land management. Back when truck pulling in Taylor County was a bunch of good old boys headed out to the flat pond on the weekend. Fire up a barbecue grill, pull up a case of beer, turn on the stereo, and trucks didn't cost no $500,000, $250,000. It was a little different back then. We used to go to places like Island Prairie, the racetrack, motorcycle court, some people call it. I mean, there were several different ones. Parker's Pond, over by where our Parker's place was. Wayne Cochran had a pond. I mean, it was a different time era back then. We'd go down and play in the woods. I'm assuming based on that plaque right there, Barney was Taylor County firefighter. Taylor County Fire Rescue. Old Chad Brown. I remember Chad from school and all around. Also, Chad worked construction quite a bit. I want to say the last place I'd worked around Chad, and don't hold me to this, but I want to say it was in Indiana, Terre Haute, Indiana. Seemed like him and a guy named Bobo. I don't remember for sure, but I think they came up there on the Indiana job. We done some work up there for PSI, Public Service of Indiana, redoing some boilers with Foster Wheeler. I want to say that's when I seen Chad last. Chad passed at 28 years old. Chad was another fine Taylor Countyan. J.W. Brown. I knew Mr. J.W. If I remember right, J.W. was Chad's grandfather. Mr. J.W. and my dad was friends. Mr. J.W. and me were friends. Mr. J.W. used to come by the feed store, buy a lot of seed, different things. He'd always ask about my daddy and my people and sit around and talk. Me and Mr. J.W., we go way back. I didn't really know Mr. J.W.'s wife very well. I did know who she was. But I knew Mr. J.W. Mr. J.W. was a shorter man, thin man, always wore a ball cap, had glasses. I can see Mr. J.W. right now. In my mind, I can sure picture Mr. J.W. He was another great gentleman. Grew a garden. I mean, he just loved his grandchildren, loved life in general. Really great fella. David Williams, I remember David. David's older than I am, quite a bit older than I am, but I remember David. David was a hometown tragedy. David lost his life in the line of duty. It was a tragic event for the history of Perry. David, I didn't know him really well. When I say knew him, I knew him from the community and the families around and the story that happened. David was 26 years old when he lost his life in the line of duty, doing what he done, serving his community. Love these old stones. If I remember right, and I could be wrong, when I was researching some of these people, the son of this family made this stone himself, if I remember right. So we decided we're going to walk down the fence and outside to these that are outside. We're not going to go into none of these that they have fenced. So we're going to walk to this back corner, see if we know any of these people. Alan Gunner and Janice Gunner. Alan was heavily into the Native American history. Studied it. Alan could actually make an arrowhead. I've seen Alan do it with flint. I've seen him do it heating flint up with water, dropping the water on it, and I've also seen him do it with a deer antler. When I first come back to Taylor County and settled back down, I went through a pretty rough time trying to find work, get a job. Nobody wanted to hire a construction worker locally because they was all afraid he was going to leave. Alan was known for selling produce, citrus. Alan would go all over and get produce and citrus, and we'd bring it back to Perry, and he'd set me up on the side of the road selling it, as he did many other people over the years. Especially around the holidays, you sell a lot of bundles of mustards, collards, turnips. Alan lived down off 98 when I knowed him most of my life. That I ever knew him. He always had a few camps here and there, a piece of farmland somewhere to lease that he was working. Alan just whatever it took to make it happen. Had some good times working for old Alan, sitting up on the corner. The place I used to sit the most with him is if you go up on 19, where 19 and Highway 98 intersect on the corner. If you're looking down 98, where JB's tire used to be on the right, on the left-hand side, it's an empty lot now. It used to be an old closed-down service station that would throw some shade. We'd pull up on that corner and set up the trailer and start selling. Sold a lot of vegetables at old Alan. A lot of old Alan and his wife, Miss Janice. Alan was 75 when he passed. Give you a little shot from the back of the cemetery before we go. We're standing back here by Alan's burial. And that's the rest of the cemetery that's fenced off separately. We're parked straight across there in the middle of the camera.
Seeing people.
And then around to here, where we walked around this end. See, it looks quite different. When I was here the last time, that was all woods. Now it's all clear cut, and you can actually see a pond way over there. Glistening, old flat pond. As we walk back here, where you pull in, over in this clump of trees, we're gonna walk over and check that out. Every time I've ever come here, I like to walk over and see it. I don't know if it was man dug, or if it's a sinkhole, or what it is. You know, keep in mind, over here behind us is a big flat pond. I've never seen this hole that it didn't have some water in it, and over the years, every time I used to come down here, I'd walk over to this hole. In relation to the cemetery, this is the hole. We're gonna turn around here before we walk up to it. And then this is the cemetery. And we're parked right over there. So let's ease over here and see what the old hole looks like today. It's got water in it. I can see the water in it. Let's see if we can find a better opening. I think it's about close as we're gonna be able to get. That's that hole. Not a very big hole. So I don't know. That may have been originally dug for cows. This was cattle land, still is cattle land. There's cow poop right outside the cemetery. So, as I say, over the years coming down here, I've never seen it empty, where it didn't have any water in it. I don't know about what it is. That's pretty much it for this cemetery, Indian Springs Cemetery in Taylor County, Florida.